All right, welcome. Thank you all for being here. We are doing a book study over the next few weeks on this book. It's called You Are What You Love by James K. Smith. And last week was our first week. And I think this is going to last about 4 weeks. So we'll do chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. And if you're a careful reader, you'll know that there are 7 chapters in the book. I think. Yeah,
There are
7 chapters. So the first 4 are kind of like the meat of the book, is the main argument. And then chapter 5, 6, and 7 apply that to 3 different spheres, to the home, to schooling and education, and to vocations and workplace. So I figured you can kind of at that point read whatever you're interested in, or maybe read it all if you're interested in just seeing what he has to say about each of those areas. Let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you tonight with grateful hearts. We thank you for this opportunity to be together as a community. We thank you for the opportunity to pause and to reflect on some of the ways we are being formed and shaped, either closer to your image or further away from it. We pray that you would help us to see practical ways of drawing closer to you in all areas of our lives. For we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so just a quick review of the material we covered last week, which had to do with basically why write a book about this, what it's all about. And the author, James Smith, he's drawing on a very old tradition that says we are more than just thinking things. We're more than just, someone calls it brains on a stick, right? That we have desires and passions and emotions, and we're much more complicated than just people who think and process information, like little computer processors. And as a result, we are being molded and shaped on a regular basis by things that are often not things we're thinking about, but things that affect us, by things that attract us or repel us, or by practices that we just habitually perform, and they have an effect on the kinds of people we are becoming. So he's drawing on it's an Augustinian tradition, and Augustine himself is drawing on Aristotle. And it's this idea that the actions that we perform on a regular basis, day in and day out, become habitual. And then after they become habitual, they become character. They become parts of who we are as individuals. And at that point, they're the common expression, second nature, right? They're not first nature. We're not born being courageous or being having the virtue of love, but by practice, by habituating ourselves to those kinds of practices, those virtues, those character traits can be formed in us. Now, the sort of shadow side of that, the dark undercurrent, is that the same process works for vices and works for deforming us. So the practices that we engage in over and over again, we call them bad habits, or sort of almost like a euphemism, right? Oh, it's just a bad habit. Bad habits can eventually become a part of who we are as well, and we call those in the ethical world vices. So the sort of unique contribution that Jamie Smith is bringing to this conversation is that it's not just it's not just in our formal thinking about what kind of person do I want to be, what do I think is the good life, things like that, but it's our constant experiences, our practices, our routines, our habits, both inside the church and outside the church, that are forming and shaping us into the kinds of people we are, and in fact that are the clue to the thing that we value most of all, that we love, that we worship. So as Christians, we should be concerned about what we value most, what we love, what is our ultimate concern. And so he's going to give us some ways of kind of litmus tests, or different ways of sort of testing out the waters and seeing what it is that we truly value. So that was sort of setting the stage for this week. This week in chapter 2, he talks about some unexpected places to look for formative liturgies. He calls them liturgies, any regular practice that has the potential to shape us. So he says, if you look out into the world outside of the church, there are practices that we engage in on a regular basis that are forming us, but that we've probably never thought about as contributing to who we are as individuals. And so he wants to sort of flag that and say that that's a real thing. He's not just making this up. And also to kind of examine one in particular as an example. Yeah, Ross.
I feel a lot better about playing golf now.
Ah. There was another philosopher who wrote this interesting piece on. It was supposed to be a joke, but he was writing on baseball, the American, American sport, and he was talking about how all of these, baseball is the sort of pinnacle of the sporting world, and all of these other things where there's these these nets and people hit balls under them, and it's like this warfare kind of thing. And he talks about the perfect diamond and this all this kind of stuff. Wax is eloquent. But yeah, it does. We typically don't. Part of what made it so funny is that we typically don't think of those kinds of activities as things that are affecting us, and they really do. So, all right. Let me see if this is gonna work tonight. Yay. Okay. So, what do you really want? Really, what do you really want? He starts by saying, which I think is really interesting. How you're supposed to answer that question, right? If a priest comes up to you and says, "What do you want most of all?" Everyone knows what you're supposed to say, right? But that's different than, is that really what you want? And just by phrasing it that way, I think it gets to the heart of what the heart of what he's trying to get to, which is that our heart's desires and our thoughts about a particular, or what we believe are our thoughts about something, don't necessarily line up. That there can sometimes be a gap there. I forget who it was. Someone once said that the hardest distance to travel is the 18 inches between your head and your heart, right? It's very difficult to get out of that, thinking one way or the other, or to actually combine the two. So we know what we ought to say to answer that question, and that may be an honest intellectual answer. I mean, you may have thought it through and said, if I pursue this, if this is my ultimate good, that's going to disappoint me. If I pursue this, that's going to disappoint me. This is ultimately not going to work. So really, God is the thing I should want the most of all. I mean, you could have actually gone through some kind of argument like that, and it could have convinced you, right, intellectually. But that's still different than wanting that to be what you want. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So he uses an example of this movie, which I haven't seen. I don't know if anyone has seen this movie. I forget what it's called.
Eternal Sunshine.
No, not that one.
The Road?
Beauty.
The Road?
Where is it here? The Stalker, or just Stalker. Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker.
Ooh, sounds
No, it's not like that.
It's not, okay.
So for those of you who haven't seen the book or haven't had a chance to look at chapter 2, let me just explain it a little bit. He says there are these three characters, and one of the characters is called Stalker, and again, I haven't seen it, so I'm just describing based on what he said.
Right.
But they're on a quest to find this. I should have looked at this more carefully. They're on a quest to find this place. A destination shrouded in mystery and intrigue, but eventually we learn that they're leading them to the zone, and more specifically, the room within the zone. Okay, and the idea is that when you go into this room, you receive whatever you most desire, your heart's desire. And so it's a sort of a kind of a Canterbury tale, a quest, and so you'll go on pilgrimage trying to find this thing. But what happens is at the sort of climactic moment of the movie, these two people who have been guided to this place, they finally arrive, and the room is right there, and they stall, and they don't know if they want to go in. And Jamie Smith uses this as an illustration of maybe a hesitancy that we might feel once you realize that there is a possibility that there is a gap between what we think is our highest end and what we want to be our highest end. Would you really want to go into that room? In other words, are you scared of what you might find if you were to enter that room? So I didn't have a chance to watch the movie, so I can't recommend it or not, but
I would like to be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, there's a sense in which part of, so he's drawing on Augustine here, right? Little sidebar on Augustine. Augustine's Confessions, one of the masterworks of Western literature, is in many cases it's the first spiritual autobiography. It's the first of any number of different things. But one of the things that he does in that for the first time is really turn inward in a way that was unprecedented. And so we're still kind of trying to catch up all these years later with this Augustinian insight that there's so much going on around us, but really who we are and the foundation of our being, we have to look in to find those things. And there's a sense in which it's so easy to be distracted by this or by that. It's so easy to keep ourselves occupied by this or that. And we often don't have the time or the leisure or the opportunity or the will to sit down and actually think about what is it that we love the most? What do we actually want out of these things? Another sidebar, I spent a couple years teaching philosophy, and I taught at a university. It was a public university, and most of the kids were like sleeping for most of the classes, but because they had to take these courses. So, but in the history of philosophy classes, when I got to Aristotle, I would always say that at the end of the class before I started teaching Aristotle's ethics, I would say, we're going to start at the beginning of next class. In the first 5 minutes, we're going to deal with the purpose of life, and then we'll go on to something else afterwards. And they would start laughing, and if they were awake, and then so we would go, and it really is. It takes about 5 minutes to go through that part. It's like one page in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the first page, and it's along these lines. He says basically, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but everything that you do for a reason. Right? Even things that you don't think are for a reason are for a reason. And you say some reasons are subordinated to other reasons. You learn how to play the piano because you want to play a piece of music, or whatever the case may be. And then all of those, at some point there has to be a ultimate reason for doing any of those others. Otherwise, there's no reason to do anything. In other words, the thing that's motivating your behavior. He's not saying you have to know what this is, but he's saying there's something that's motivating your behavior. And it's why you get up in the morning, it's why you do whatever. And he makes, interestingly, the same distinction. He says, he thinks that there is objectively something, the summum bonum, the highest good, that should be drawing us all. But he said you can be mistaken about what that is, right? You can think it's something else. And it can be leading you kind of in the wrong direction, at dead ends. Anyway, just a different way of getting at the same kind of train of thought. But thinking about that gap, how do we know if we think that there might be a gap, or we're not sure if there is a gap? How do we know what it is that we desire most? What is our deepest longing? And someone who wrote a book about that movie that he was talking about Jeffrey Dyer wrote, "Your deepest desire is the one manifested by your daily life and habits." So that's generic, but it's at least a hint of where we're going. Your deepest desire is the one that's manifested by your daily life and habits. Does that sound at all like a tree is known by its fruit or something along those lines?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Jesus said a lot very similar to this. It's not that the fruit is what makes the tree. It's just this is the way that we see the result. We don't see what's going on in the tree itself, and that's often true of ourselves. What is not known to us is what is inside, and what shows up in our lives, our daily activities, is how we can kind of get a clue as to what's going on inside.
It's that phrase, walking the walk.
Yeah, exactly. And a part of the larger tradition is the fact that we also know that these two things don't always line up, that there is a gap. Jamie Smith is not an Anglican, not an Episcopalian, but he references the Book of Common Prayer and the confession that's a part of our liturgy. And he says most traditions have some sort of confession in their liturgy. He just likes our words. But he said that's the fact that we do this on a regular basis. And in the old confession is we have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts. That idea of, when you think about what you're saying, we've followed too much our desires. Well, that implies that the desires are disoriented, right? They're disordered. They're not pointing to the correct end. They're not desiring the right things. Otherwise, why would you be confessing to following your desires? So there's a kind of deep wisdom to this understanding that what we desire might not be the right object for us, and what we desire might not match up with what we think we desire.
Is that kind of like, if you apply it materialistically, I want all my desires to have a fur coat.
Right.
You obtain the fur coat and then it means nothing to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's almost precisely one of the illustrations that he uses, because he's going to talk about one of the sort of secular liturgies that he talks about is the shopping mall or consumerism, and more generally, and so one of the questions is, does it work? Does it get what you want? Does it
Not
end up?
necessarily.
And then the other question is, as a Christian, is this what we should be doing, and all that kind of stuff. We will get, that's exactly right though. And where he's eventually going to get in chapter 3, he's going to talk about this is a more negative, or he's deconstructing a lot of what we see in our everyday lives. In the next chapter, he's going to talk about how to form us properly. So it's going to focus on worship and the things that we do over there, like you just did, that helps to form our hearts and our desires towards love of God and neighbor. All right. Our loves are formed and oriented by regular practices, which Jamie calls liturgies. This often happens without our awareness. One estimate is that only 5% of what we do is the result of conscious, deliberative choices. Think about it on a daily basis. If you were to say, well,
It's probably less than that.
maybe, but I mean, initially when I read that, I said that couldn't be, because when you think about your own day, you think, well, I'm making decisions all the time. I'm, going from one activity to the next. I'm making this, but you're not aware of all the things that you're doing that you're not aware of, almost by definition, right? He gives a good illustration. One is, he said he taught 4 teenage children how to drive and survived. And he said it taught him that how second nature driving has become for him, right? How it has become like second nature to him. When you're teaching someone to drive, they don't know how to do it at all. They don't know which foot to put where. They don't know how to, when to do this, the turning, everything you have to learn, and you have to think about everything consciously. I remember when I was learning how to drive stick, the person who was teaching me, I think it was my dad actually, I asked him, am I supposed to, I forget what the question was now because I don't even think about it anymore, but I was asking him something about when to release the clutch or something. And I said, do I have to do it slow, do it all at the same time or slowly or whatever? And he answered one way, which was incorrect. Not that he didn't know how to do it, but it had become second. He didn't even remember what he was doing every day driving his car. And that's how we are. He uses the example of you had a long day, something happened at the end of the day, you were, someone blew up at you at a meeting or something, and so it's on your mind, and you kind of huff out to your car, and you get in the car, and you're reviewing it over in your mind. Oh, I should have said that, or I should have. He has to go to my forgiveness class too. I should have said that, I should have done that. I can't believe the person said that, and da da da. And all of a sudden, you're in your driveway at home, and you don't remember having driven, and something like that is probably a fairly common experience. And it just goes to show that on a regular basis, a lot of what's going on in our lives is just like breathing or blinking, and it's just going on without us being aware of it. It's by far, we could never do the things we do if that weren't the case. It's by far more efficient to learn something by habit, so that your body, the motor memory and everything, your body knows how to do it, and then you can just do it on autopilot while you do other things that where you have to make decisions, deliberate decisions. So, if that's the case, it raises the question. Some of our habits we consciously choose. Like if you say, I want to learn how to play the piano, you have to consciously choose to set aside a certain amount of time, and I'm going to work on scales now. I'm going to work on whatever. But many of these practices, these habits, we don't choose. They're just a part of our lives. They just become a part of our lives one way or another. So if you've been following his argument so far, he says, if that's the case, then you could be worshiping gods that you don't even know you're worshiping, right? We are, those habits form us, and they form the loves with which we love, our ultimate ends. And if you're not even aware of those practices or how they're forming us, we could be formed or shaped into having certain desires or certain loves or certain objects of worship that we're not even aware that we have. So, as an example of that, I think the last class I talked about the David Foster Wallace, the end of, or a little section of his Kenyon College commencement address. And this is how he opens it. This is the beginning of that address. It says, there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What's water?" But think about that for a second. If this is the environment in which you live,
Means nothing.
yeah, you're not aware of it, right?
Take it for granted.
You take it for granted. And how much of our own lives are like that? It's like fish in water. It's so much a part of our lives that we don't even notice that it's there, or that it's affecting the kind of people that we are.
Would the guy who puts on one brown sock and one blue sock?
That would be me.
They're unaware of what they're doing. They're
Right,
just doing something.
Right.
They're putting their socks on, period.
right. Yeah, we've all had that experience too, where we're thinking of something else, right? And you're not even thinking of it, all of a sudden you realize, oh. Yes, David.
Nicholas, I'm struggling with this book, it has to be said. And it's the idea that you can infer to anything something that relates to something that we know only too well. So his view was that the local mall, shopping mall, is actually one of the most religious sites in town. And the fact that it doesn't believe anything and isn't interested in engaging your intellect doesn't matter, because that doesn't make the mall a neutral space. You see, I would say the mall is a neutral space, and then things are done to you. And don't think that means the Mao isn't religious.
What is Mao?
Shopping mall.
You can't pronounce shopping.
I'm sorry.
He doesn't know how to speak English.
Apologies for that. But, I spent much of my career developing shopping centres and shopping malls.
Right.
And the idea that I met lots of completely crazy people talking about what malls do and don't
Right.
do. But the idea that I'm reading for the book, the mall is a religious site, not because it is theological, but because it's liturgical. I
Yeah.
find that
That's it.
very difficult to accept.
Liturgical was, he was talking about it being habitual, it's something that you do. So,
A structure.
yeah,
Yeah, regular practice. So that is a very important question, and the distinction that you're making is, we often think of, it depends on how you use these words. You often think of religious things as having doctrine, theology, content, right? Things that you think about, right? And that is a part of religious traditions. But what he's talking about when he uses religion typically is more of like rites, what you do when you go over to church.
you don't think about it, you just do it.
Right, or that, like, if you're a sociologist of religion, you talk about the cultus. What do people do when they go to make a sacrifice, or what do they do when they go to temple? And if they don't care what people believe in on one level, they just want to know what are the practices that are going on. And so what he's trying to say, and I'll get there in just a second when we get to the mall, but what he's trying to say is that if you're going looking for theological content or something where they're, here's that they're peddling an idea or they want you to believe this or that, he said, no, they couldn't care less about what you believe theologically. But what he's saying is that the rites, the practices that you're encouraged to engage in, and it's not just, he's just using this as one example, but in the shopping mall, are processes that nonetheless do have an effect on us. They do form us. And so he's not said, it has nothing to do with the intent of necessarily, but the intent of the people who are setting up the mall or the shops or anything like that. It has to do with what that particular practice does to you if you do it regularly or habitually. So let's.
Does it make a difference if you like shopping or not?
Choose to get into a mall.
I like shopping, I like having things, I'm not unmaterialistic.
Right.
I mean, so
Right.
that's why probably this doesn't make much sense.
Right.
But there's a ritual involved with buying something.
Right. Yeah.
That's simple.
Absolutely. Well, let's get there because might as well. We're gonna run out of time anyway. I usually do. Okay. Well, let's just show you visually. This is a little helpful. This has nothing to do with what he was talking about, but except that it's a similar idea. So on the left-hand side, average American watches more than 1,800 hours of TV per year. So those are those little white TV screens you can't really see on the left. Yeah, sorry. Then it says, where it says the little 90 on the right-hand side, if you were to read your Bible for 15 minutes a day, that would be 90 hours a year. If you were to read your Bible for 30 minutes a day, that would be 180 hours per year. And an hour a day, how many people read their Bible for an hour a day? That would be 365 hours per year. The average American watches 1,800 hours of TV per year. So it's these are we talk about the importance of Bible reading, the importance of prayer, things like that. I attend church on Sunday. These are all good things. An hour of church on Sunday, once a week. If you come every week, that's 365 hours a year. So even if that's really stellar, if it's competing against 1,800 hours, and that's just TV, that's not
I wonder how many hours per day that's supposed to mean.
It's five
about.
5 hours a day.
That's quite a lot.
Yeah. Now, it's a pretty recent book that this came from, 2021, I think, but the information it's drawing on was probably a few years earlier than that. But even still, and then now it's technology and other
The
forms of
phone
technology.
even tells you how
Right.
many hours you
Right.
spent last week,
Right.
and sometimes it's shocking.
Right. So,
the phone, the number of times you spend on your phone reading the news and everything. Yeah, and that is shocking,
Yeah. So keep all of those things in the back of your mind. It's not, he's not picking on the shopping mall in particular. I mean, he is picking on shopping malls, but I mean, he's not saying that's the only problem, right? He's saying that this is just one example. He couldn't write about them all because the book would be way too long. So he's using that as one example, but he tells you some of the other things that you could do the same thing, same kind of analysis with. So let's just get to it. The mall as temple. What was, for those of you who are able to look at it ahead of time, and feel free, obviously, if you don't have to have the book to come to the study, obviously. And if you like, some people like to read before they come, and some people like to read afterwards. So feel free to do whatever is best for you. But for those who were able to look at it, what did you think of this analysis that he gives of the shopping mall? He says he's not just trying to describe it on the surface level, but he's trying to kind of look at it slant and see it kind of what he calls it an apocalyptic lens.
I thought it was brilliant about the atriums and then how they block out the cars. You can't see the parking lot,
On the side.
but you have all these skylights that open the light to come in from above and the atriums. So it's almost like a cathedral going in.
Mhm.
I thought that was interesting.
I don't go to malls.
So the idea is he's looking for, how, we all know like how different spaces affect us, right? When you go to, I mean, architecture matters, it makes an important a difference in how we experience things. So, if you go into a grocery store, no windows, no clocks, they want you to get lost, so they put the milk in the back, that kind of thing. Because they want you to spend time there and shop more, right? But they want everything to look clean and tidy and orderly, and this looks nice on the shelf, it's gonna look nice in your shelf, that kind of thing. It's very, a lot of that is very deliberate, but even when it's not deliberate, the environments that we find ourselves in shape us. They have an effect on us. So he talks about, I'll just name a couple of things. He says, the familiar architecture, no matter where you are in the country or the world, they have the same kind of look, right? Shopping malls typically have the same kind of look. So you feel at home. There's a sense of sanctuary. No, the outside, like you mentioned, Linda, the outside walls are blocked out. So all the kind of mess that you're leaving behind, this is a kind of sanctuary space, a resting place, a place of repose where you can kind of, have you ever walked into a mall and been like, I left all of that behind, now it's quiet in here, there's the nice kind of peaceful music playing in the background, that kind of stuff.
And it's become a social setting, especially for teenagers. If you've been to the mall recently, they like to hang out over there. It's a place they like to come.
Absolutely. He also talks about how the way it's set up, it's sort of labyrinth-like. It's not at streets and avenues, right? It's you kind of wind this way, you kind of wind that way. Recalling this kind of you're on a journey. You want to kind of meander. You want to wander through. You don't want to find the goal too quickly. In other words, that the whole process is not goal oriented. So it's a pleasant contrast to most of the rest of our lives, which are goal oriented. I need to get through these tasks. I need to get this done at work, whatever. And yet, at the same time, it messes with our sense of time. Because of the light and the windows and things and the way it's always kind of lit up, you can lose a sense of time of day. And yet he says there's a strong sense of seasonal time, right? He's using religious language to get you to kind of see what he's trying to say. So he says the festal calendar, like in the church, think about what we do throughout the year, different colors for different seasons, right? We're in Epiphany now, so this is a green season. We just celebrate a different feast, so we take the colors down and put white up because it's the Confession of Peter. Things like that. We celebrate different, we mark those by decorating differently, basically. And he's saying they do that in the mall too, right? It's the lead up,
Halloween.
it's the lead up to Christmas, it's Valentine's Day, whatever, and everything is decorated that way.
I saw chocolate Easter bunnies on CBS the other day. Come on.
It gets earlier and earlier, right?
That is
That happened in church history too, you know, they expanded periods of time, you know, when you celebrate different seasons. He talks about, and this is, I think, the heart of it, when you get to that, what's actually going on in the consumer exchange. He's talking about, says when you walk around and you see the mannequins and you see the posters and things, he talks about them embodying a vision of the good life. Okay, so you're walking around and you see someone, a very sporty looking mannequin with a tennis racket or something. And it's not that you're thinking through, I think I could be that person or whatever, you know, or I want to be that person. It's not conscious or rational like that, but it's giving you, he calls it an icon, which is, what do icons do? They kind of, they're ways for us to get to think through to divine realities or to transcendent realities. So it's a kind of, it gives us a glimpse of a vision for one view of the good life. Think about advertising. It doesn't have to be in the mall. Think about advertising. You know, advertising doesn't make any sense at all. If you've ever tried to analyze it rationally, it doesn't make any sense. But it just it moves you. It evokes something, right? It starts trying to get at something a little bit deeper than just, I think the next time I want to, tire, I think I'm going to go with them. No, it has nothing to do with that. They just want you to remember a name, or they want you to feel the sense of security that whatever it is.
I think of the Marlboro Man.
Yeah, the Marlboro Man, exactly, right. What does that have to do? There's so many, I love watching I don't watch commercials, but when I do, I love watching the ones that, you have no idea what this is about. And then at the end, it's like Honda.
Yeah.
Like, what's that?
Where'd that come from?
Like you go, no. Right.
Okay.
Anyway, so what he's saying is that this is a gospel that attracts us, not convinces us. It's trying to get us to be captivated, be not persuaded, but be enthralled with something. And what's interesting is that a lot of theologians have been saying that really that's what good theology does. And so let's just give you one example. There's a Catholic theologian, Hans Urs von Balthasar, who wrote this whole thing, this whole big theological work, and it has a lot to do with precisely this thing that he's saying, I'm not trying to convince you of this or that or the other thing. He's just trying to cast a vision of how beautiful the Christian vision is. And I have 5 minutes. That's it. How beautiful the vision of the Christian, how beautiful the Christian vision is, so that people see it and they're captivated. You capture their hearts rather than their minds. The question that he poses is, if you can see some of that, let's grant for the sake of argument that there's some of that going on in a lot of our public life, in the mall, for example. What does those liturgical practices, what do they teach us about the good life? What message do they convey? He said you could do this about the stadium, you could do this about the university. He said you could use it about technology, smartphones and things like that. But if we just think about, since you used the example, if we think about the mall, what does this teach us? Let's skip that one. Okay, what does this teach us? And he gives us 4 kind of four things that he draws, 4 lessons that he draws from this. The first, he says, I'm broken, therefore I shop. Now, if you think of the images that are often used, you would say, well, I don't understand the broken. No, it's that these are the ideal images, the perfect images, the spotless models, all that kind of stuff. And the implicit message is, this is not you, right? You don't measure up to this. And it's not, don't think of this as a rational argument, because that's not what it is. It's just there's a sense in which you see success, you see happiness, you see pleasure, you see fulfillment things going smoothly, relationship problems are gone, none of that shows up in those mannequins and the
Does
advertisements.
this connect to retail therapy?
Does it connect to what?
Retail therapy?
I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know about retail
People who are
therapy?
shopping to feel better.
Oh, yeah.
It's there.
Yeah. But the flip side is that we see something lacking in ourselves that we think this is going to help us fix, right?
A new dress is going to make you feel better.
Right, exactly.
Handbag, the fancy handbag of the year. You buy that particular bag,
Right.
you're gonna be part of the in group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's, on the one hand, the first one is when you see something that's lacking implicitly in you, and you want to fix it in something that you can find. Now, one of the dangers of that is if you articulate it like that. A lot of these, if you just say what they say, I realize that's silly. That wouldn't actually fix it. But of course, it valorizes things that are not the good life, right? There are things those are things that are not going to ultimately fix our problems or make us happy. I shop with others. This is connecting to that, Linda, like you were saying, that communal side of things. There is a sense in which they go shopping together, like to go meet as friends or go together as a group. But he says, I think quite insightfully, even in those communal gatherings, there's something about the community that is competitive and objectifying, just because of where it takes place. And he talks about how he was watching his teenage girls, and they would meet with friends. And he said, I would watch, and as soon as someone new came to the group, you would see someone get looked up and down. What are they wearing? What shoes do they have on? What is And again, not making any kind of conscious decision about anyone or anything like that, but there's a sense in which there's this tendency to say, how do they measure up against me? Do I get to feel good or feel bad about this person that's coming to the room? And then also, how do they measure up against that ideal, reality? So it's both competitive and teaching us to focus on the wrong kinds of things, not the person's character, not their intellect, not their sense of humor. I shop and shop and shop, therefore I am. This is kind of connecting to some of what we were saying before. It's the flip side of that, like the retail therapy, like we were saying. This idea that the goods and services that you buy are going to be somehow rescue you or save you or help you with some big problem that you have. We all know what that's like to really want something, and then you get it, and then he says the dazzle fades quickly, right? It's pretty soon it's not all that significant, or it's not as good as you thought it was going to be, or even if it is really nice, it still doesn't fill the hole that you have. It doesn't fill the longing.
You have another hole.
Yeah, or there's another one, right? If I have the yellow earrings, but if I had the orange ones, I could use them with, whatever.
You should have bought both.
So he said, but the flip side is, you buy a computer, 2 years, it's outdated, right? So the flip side is things are both overvalued and undervalued, right? We think, this is gonna last forever, it's gonna save me, it's gonna be my deliverer, my rescuer. And yet on the other side, it's like, as soon as you've used it a couple times, throw it away and get a new one. So it has no value on one end or very little value on one end, and too much value on the other end.
It's like the Kleenex generation.
Mhm.
It's the Kleenex generation. Use it, throw it. Go
Yeah.
to something else.
Yeah. And then this is the last one. The last thing he says is the don't ask, don't tell. And he raises a lot of important questions about, where does this stuff, we walk in and everything's just there, right? And this is true of the grocery store as well as true of any kind of, consumer situation. Where does it come from? How does something get to where it is? What kind of labor is involved? And he raises questions like,
Sweatshops.
yeah, that for sure, and the effect on the environment and things like that. But also, is this something a practice that we could universalize? So, for example, drawing on a very different philosophical tradition, Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, said, You can't affirm something as good if you can't universalize it, if you can't make it true for everyone in all circumstances.
Sounds like socialism.
Well, no, not like that. It means like
What's the matter with it?
honesty, right? You can there's nothing inconsistent about being honest all the time in every situation. He said, but lying, you have to break the rules sometimes, right? You can't always lie. Everyone can't always lie all the time. Think about that for a second. And then, but so that's the idea. It's called the categorical imperative. He's saying something similar. He's saying, think about what it takes for our shopping mall, our grocery store to be stocked the way it is, and is that possible to universalize everywhere? Probably not. You know. So anyway, so think about things like that. Those are just a couple. And again, what he's trying to get us to do is he's using one example, shopping, as an example, as a model. But he wants us to start thinking about all of our regular practices, the things that we do habitually on a regular basis. These are, again, they're not going to be earth-shattering activities precisely because they're the kinds of things that we do every day without even thinking about it. But start thinking about them and do what he says is a liturgical audit of your life. Doesn't that sound fun? A liturgical audit. So he says, reflect on the rituals of your life, the things you do on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, annual routines. And this is modeled loosely over on something like the St. Augustine Examen that some people do every day. Think about what are some of these secular liturgies. So don't worry about what you do here at Trinity, but when you're we'll talk about that later. But when you're when you're not here, what are the kinds of things you do on a regular basis?
Laundry.
Exactly.
So what if you, unless you.
Exactly.
I don't see what the
Laundry.
laundry.
Oh,
And
There's
then
certain things that
Brush
well,
your
they need to
teeth.
get done. I mean, I don't really
And then-
see that you want to do them.
right. And some
I'm
of that
missing a lot of this.
some of that is some of them he's not trying to categorize things good and bad, right? These are he's not saying you're gonna
You're just misusing words. I mean,
No, they,
secular liturgies is an oxymoron.
Yeah, I agree with
You know,
that.
I don't know how many people in this room would talk about lay issues using the word gospel.
right.
gospel truth. It's gospel truth. Really.
No, but
I
sorry.
heard it from a friend.
No, the gospel, when you use the word gospel and gospel truth, that you're referring back to a religious element.
Correct.
I just
I
find
was trying to give you an example.
secular liturgies to me just
Yeah,
just
it's
nonsense.
definitely his style, which is
Very irritating.
obviously but he's doing it and he says it quite upfront that he's doing it quite intentionally because he wants us to think about them in religious terms. So he's using those terms to help us to categorize it. You don't have to use, I mean, you can say it differently. But the reason, when you say secular liturgy, it gets you to think, oh, I'm talking about something that has the potential of being formative in the way that these religious liturgies are formative.
Yeah, but if you look at any definition of liturgy,
Oh my gosh, you got Wikipedia.
no, I haven't got Wikipedia. You know, public office in ancient Greece, and otherwise that, according to formulation which makes the public religious worship, especially Christian worship, is conducted. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but he's going beyond it and using it.
Yeah,
You're allowed to.
so he's basically, think of it like an analogy. He's trying to draw an analogy between the kinds of things we do in church and things that we do other places.
that's a perfectly good thing to do, but you don't need to use the
Oh,
language.
So don't. Every time I say liturgy, just say practice. 'Cause that's really all he
That's
means.
fine.
Okay, that's all he means. So take a practice audit of your life. Reflect on the secular practices that you engage in, and what kind of person do those practices want you to become? Does that make sense? What he's trying to get you to think about?
So are we gonna start practicing punctuality now?
Well, I was trying. See,
He is practicing.
I'm trying to encourage a habit of abundance, you know? No rush, right? You want to have as much gospel truth as you can get. I was trying, didn't you see my
Oh,
arm?
I saw you ignore it, yeah.
All right, let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, we thank you for a good sense of humor and for all of the many blessings you've given us. We thank you for the time to be together, and we pray that you would bear with us in our frailty and our weakness. Help us to rejoice in your goodness, in your faithfulness, and the hope you give us in Jesus. For we ask this in his name.
Amen.
Right.